Chase, interesting stuff in Ninerland. A lot of Niner fans obviously not engaged in the Super Bowl talk as much, but they're really engaged in the Senior Bowl and the East-West Shrine game and the draft, which is going to be so vitally important for the 49ers. And then we're seeing lots of articles here in Northern California about the Niners connected to this guy and that guy. Matt Mayoko said if the 49ers were to splurge on one free agent this offseason, that he would want it to be the Falcons center Drew Dahlman. And yet there's other reports that say that the Niners probably will build up the offensive line in the draft, and it won't be necessarily a veteran. But the Niners have also signed Weston Richburg and Alex Mack in the past, and they value the center position. Other people are suggesting other names. Somebody the other day said they should go after DJ Reed. A popular name is DJ Jones. And Michael Lombardi said some of the talk coming out of some of the All-Star games is that the Niners may be a surprise bidder for Tee Higgins. And at first you go, nah, can't be true, can't be valid. He's one of the premier free agents. But I actually kind of was expecting this, not necessarily this particular Tee Higgins, but I was expecting a wide receiver of note to kind of come onto the Niner radar. Why? Because Ayuk is probably not going to play. Debo, I would say, is, may be here, may not be here, and may not be good if he is here. Pearsall is an unknown. Cowing's more of an unknown. Jawan Jennings is not a dynamic, fast receiver. He runs in the 4.7s. He was a seventh-round pick. It's a great story, but nothing more. They need a dynamic, big-time, it scares defensive coordinators and opposing corners type of a receiver. Higgins would check that box. What do you think of the rumor? How viable is it that the 49ers might be able to take some of their cap savings and pay Brock, but then also maybe land a big-time free agent like a guy like Higgins? What do you think?
Yeah, you mentioned Brock Purdy, and obviously he's going to go into the final year of his rookie contract. He's one of the best bargain plays in the NFL. Depending on how the Niners structure that contract, he can play under that number. Realistically, he's probably going to get a pay bump for this year, but they can also backload that deal. And Tim Kawakami with the interesting report that this might be a short-term contract for Brock Purdy and not really structured to the likes of some of these other elite quarterbacks who have made a lot of money. And I've maintained this entire time. That's what's best for the team. If the Niners can save some money on that Purdy deal, build up the rest of their roster while still giving Purdy the compensation that obviously he has earned. But if you backload that contract, you restructure some other deals like Fred Warner, which can open up $12 to $13 million over the next couple of years. If you give George Kittle a contract extension, if you pull off some of these salary cap gymnastics, the Niners are already in a really good cap position. They carried over about $50 million from 2024 to 2025. They are going to release Javon Hargrave with that post-June 1 designation. And so this is what you see really good general managers and organizations do. This is what Howie Roseman does all the time with the Philadelphia Eagles. You get creative with ways to create cap space, which then leads us to a player like Tee Higgins. I think what you mentioned with Brandon Ayuk is true. He's shredded up his knee, and we're not sure when he's going to be able to come back. Other wide receivers on the team are relative unknowns. I like what I saw from Ricky Pearsall the last couple of games. I think he has some juice. I never think he's going to be a number one guy. I think he's going to be a really good complementary player. Jawan Jennings is going into the final year of his contract. Jacob Cowing has some wiggle, but we barely saw him play because Kyle Shanahan didn't seem to trust him all that much. And Deebo Samuel is entering the final year of his deal. So if you pay Purdy long-term contract extension, even if it's shorter term, you are giving him money for the foreseeable future, for the next few years. And you know that Purdy, after what you saw in 2024, does need some pieces around him. And let me throw this in there too. You're not sure what the future of Christian McCaffrey is going to be. Bilateral Achilles tendonitis and the knee injury as well. And so if you go after a player like Tee Higgins, he has been in the shadows a little bit of Jamar Chase, who outside of Justin Jefferson might be the second best wide receiver in the game. You can make the argument he's the best wideout in the game. A second-round pick in 2020 was Higgins. He is big at 6'4", 220 pounds, and his production has been really good throughout his career. Comes into the league, 908 yards as a rookie, more than 1,000 yards year 2, year 3. Only played in 12 games in 2023, 656 yards. And then last year, he played in 12 games, Larry, contract year, still had more than 911 yards, and he's been a touchdown machine. He can go up and get it. He has the size to come down with 50-50 balls. He's really a wide receiver who's going to bring a lot of physicality to the table. And his touchdowns by year, 6, 6, 7, 5, and 10. And with more opportunities, I think that he can put up even better numbers. So very interesting for Michael Lombardi, a former NFL executive, now the general manager for the UNC football program alongside Bill Belichick, to say that. And I do think that the Niners are going to make a splash this offseason. I don't think that you hire Robert Saleh and give him a bag and you bring in Brant Boyer and you really upgrade defensive coordinator, special teams coordinator, and you just are fine with coming off a 6-11 season and not go all in for 2025. I think the Niners are trying to capitalize on that finite window that they have with some of these core players. And a move like this, a move like Drew Dahlman, which I said a couple of months ago, he's my number one free agency target, given the importance at the offensive line. I think the Niners have to make those moves, and I think they'll make some splashes.
Yeah, I mean, the Higgins rumor is intriguing. And then think about Lombardi, Michael Lombardi, whatever, your opinion about him as an evaluator, he's connected. There's no doubt he's connected. And there's no doubt that people talk to him and that he gets information. As far as Higgins, 12 games this year, 73 catches, 10 touchdowns, 911 yards on a team that had Jamar Chase. Yeah. So, I mean, he's big time. Now, the Pats, the Commanders, the Texans, the Chargers are all interested as well, according to this rumor. To me, this makes perfect sense just because, I've been studying for the draft, and if you say, what do the Niners need? They need another big-time receiver because, as we kind of just laid out there, they have they have more question marks than answers at wide receiver. Okay, well, then you look at the wide receiver group, and it's very, very flawed. Teteroa McMillan from Arizona, I don't think is going to be on the board. Luther Burden from Missouri may or may not be, but they probably have other priorities. I can't really see him taking Emeka Egbuka or Isaiah Bond. I do love Trey Harris. It would be interesting to see if the Stanford kid, Ayamanor, who's big and pretty fast, if he, if they like him. But I mean, I think this is a horrendous class. I like Savion Williams from TCU right there in your neck of the woods. I love Ricky White from UNLV. He's looked pretty good. And Arian Nash from Georgia's got, I'm eager to see what he runs at the combine. But I just watched Nick Nash from San Jose State, who was very prolific in college, but he doesn't look like a pro receiver to me. This guy who played for Eastern Washington, this little kid Chisholm, had a nice little all-star game. I mean, there's a few. I mean, obviously the Oregon kid who's really a slot receiver.
Bo Nix's brother.
What's that?
He's Bo Nix's brother. They adopted him, but he's Bo Nix's brother. He's really fast.
Oh, Tez, you talking about?
Yeah. He lived with Bo Nix growing up.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So Tez, but he's literally. I mean, there are teams that I know that won't draft anybody who's under 175, 180.
He's like Tutu Atwell size.
Yeah, he's like 155, 156. He's 5'9". But I will say this, from watching him run routes in Mobile, you can't stay with him. I mean, it's like a high school kid who just has body control, and he's going up against men. But then if they ever catch him and they hit him, he's like one hit away from the end. I mean, like maybe the serious end. So, I mean, it's not a great – I mean, I kind of like the USC kid who transferred to Tulane, Mario Williams. But it's just not a great – wide receiver room. And if when you look at these guys, unless you're going to go for McMillan or Burden up top, or maybe get lucky at the end of the first with Trey Harris, I think you're looking at just guys that can only play off the bench, a few snaps here. There's not a Tee Higgins. There's not a starter. This isn't like other past drafts where there's all kinds of guys who can just plug in. This isn't Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr. year. I mean, this is just a bad collection. I think Higgins, from that perspective, Chase, makes a lot of sense because they're not going to be able to find that impact wide receiver most likely in the draft.
Yeah, first of all, your draft evaluations this week from the East-West Shrine Bowl and from the Reese's Senior Bowl have been really good. So follow Larry on X because he's putting some good scouting breakdowns out there. And it is interesting about this wide receiver class because nowadays with 7-on-7s at the high school level, and because kids coming up in high school and in college know that you're probably not going to get compensated all that much if you play running back. A lot of these kids are starting to really try out at wide receiver and play that position. And so the last few drafts we have seen loaded wide receiver classes. Last year was one of them. And you mentioned some of the prospects that came out. Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr., Brian Thomas might end up being the top wide receiver out of that class. List goes on and on and on. There are really good players in the second, third round. Ricky Pearsall, Lad McConkey. And so this year's class, yeah, it is thin. And why this Tee Higgins rumor is interesting is because not only is the draft class light on talent, the free agency class isn't good either. And so if the Niners want to upgrade at wideout, if they want to add a player, Tee Higgins is obviously the cream of the crop. After that, it's a big drop-off. Chris Godwin is the second-best wide receiver free agent target. He's coming off that nasty injury. Amari Cooper looks to be trending toward being cooked. Stephon Diggs is coming off a torn ACL. DeAndre Hopkins put up decent production with Kansas City, 50-50 guy, good in the red zone, but at that age of nearly 33 years old, he's long in the tooth. Marquise Brown barely played this year. He's obviously a speed player. There's Darius Slayton, Keenan Allen, who's also old, Deontay Johnson, who was on 4 teams this year. He's a malcontent. Mike Williams looks to be washed as well. So if San Francisco really wants to add a star wide receiver, you put all of your eggs in that basket for Tee Higgins. And then outside of that, it really is a deep drop.